Hey everyone, it's Josh, a Vintage Honda Minis, Orlando, Florida. We're putting a Lifan 125 engine into the a Honda Trail 70, CT70 DAX, depending on where you guys are. So we'll go ahead and just continue on from, we're on video 5 of the series. I'm just trying to keep them like 20 minutes or less each video or so. So this will definitely be our final video and wrap it up and test ride and do our final electrical tests and such, but we'll get it wrapped up in this video. The crankcase filled back up with the Rotella oil. Go ahead and get your factory clutch cable hooked back up. I find it easy if you make this connection down here on the clutch arm, put that cable end in, and then use the cable to pull up and seat the cable in the holder. Then we'll pull off your access cover on the engine. This is a dry area, so no oil is going to come out of here. There's a little seal back here, but for the most part, obviously, it's a dry area. And then we're going to keep this open just to make sure we have a fine tuning of our clutch actuation. So the next thing we'll do is get the carb on. We'll prime the engine. I'll show you how to do that with a drill to prime it so that oil gets pushed everywhere. We're going to build some oil pressure with the pump, with the drill, and get some oil up to the top end, and then we'll get the carb on and make our final little checks, and then we'll kick it over. This is a Mcuni VM20 carb that I'm using instead of the carb that comes with the Lifan, but if you do choose to use this one for my initial settings, I have a 17.5 Pilot jet inside, which is inside the bowl, and then on the Mcuni VM20 is this bolt right here, which is the drain bolt slash main jet. So if you pull this bolt out, the main jet's screwed into this bolt, and I'm swapping in a 110 main. That should probably get me in the ballpark of where I need to be in Florida at 0 sea level. This is a 42 millimeter opening, so that's what you're going to need for your air filter pod, is a 42 millimeter adapter. The manifold is from the engine kit. Now you have this black part that comes with the kit. This is a heat isolator, so this one is shaped that it's going to go in between the carb attachment to the intake manifold, so you're going to use that. One side has the O-ring on it for sealing, so we don't need any gaskets with this setup, because the Mcuni carb comes with an O-ring which is going to seal on this, and then this O-ring seals against this end here. And, so carb is mounted on this bike. Actually, I usually wouldn't mount the carb if it was like a stock carb that runs in line with the engine. You can't see inside of here from a visual standpoint, so I like to assemble a carb with the throttle cable and slide, and verify that slide's sitting all the way down, make some cable in adjustments if I need, and then I'll mount it. But this one is canted off to the side, so I can actually see down into the internals of the carb on this build. But one option here, we're gonna have to get free play. This free play cable end from the end of this throttle cable to the end of the ferrule is too long to work with the Mcuni carb setup. So you can either, I use some hosing, some fuel line actually, about the diameter that would go on the bottom of a CT70 carb. I cut it about 1 inch long, shoved it up on the end of the throttle cable, tapered it on this end, and by doing that, it's going to take up some of that extra slack or free play. And you know, this is the stock Mcuni top cap. Comes with this adjustment nut that's a straight nut, so it will slide into that nut and create like a little more sheathing, so that your end length here is shorter. Okay, so that's one way to do it. The other thing is they actually have a and you can use that trick kind of for all sorts of bikes when you're kind of modding your cables, or you're using different carbs and such. But there is actually a Mcuni adjustment cap. Let's see if we can get that to focus. That is the part number for it. I-M22-10-3. I don't think it's made by Mikuni, maybe it is, but it's made for the VM series top caps. So it's an elbow, kind of like a CT70 style carb elbow. It's got the adjustment on it. You get an adjustment nut here, you can raise and lower it here. So anyways, I'm going to pull that this one off and then put this on so that I can adjust my free play. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take care of that and then get my slide on, spring and slide, and then we'll test it inside the actual carb and make sure our free play is appropriate and the slide is getting full throttle and setting completely back down, seating down. Before I even go that far, this, I realized after looking at it, this has plenty of little cracks in this old cable, so I'm going to end up replacing this throttle cable. I do have a video of how to do that. I'll put a link in this video of how to get that up into the internal throttle and, and make the attachment. But here's the new cable that we're going to put in. Now, in order to work on these Mcuni, this part number I gave you, this radius is pretty tight for the size of this solid ferrule right here. So what I did is take, you can sand it down. I used a little grinding wheel and kind of just took some metal off to reduce the diameter of this ferrule to make it a little smaller. Right, don't take too much because it still needs to sit inside that slide and hold itself in place, but you need to grind this down just probably a little bit on your cable. If it doesn't need to, test fit it, don't worry about it then obviously, but if you have a hard time getting through this bend, just take a little bit of metal off it and clean it up. And then the other thing that you need to do on the end of this throttle cable is not like an 1/8 inch from the end of this, give it a little bend, like start to bend it just a little bit, the cable itself, so that it has that tweak to it, and then it will follow that run. So once you get that bend in there, you can feed it, give it some force. It's going to be a little bit tight. Actually, this one is pretty tight right now. Start that over real quick. As you can see, I'm even getting problems on it right now. But I think if you practice with a little bit of that sanding, getting it, that's probably too much of a bend. Let's bend it back just a little bit. There it goes. So just got to work on that little kink, make sure don't bend it too much, but that's what you kind of have to do to make this fit through. So once it gets through, it's fine. It's going to have a lot of freedom to move in and out. It's just in this little ferrule in through that part. Alright, throttle cable's replaced with a new one. Get your elbow. I use a CT70, but you can also buy a part that matches this Mcuni adapter here for the top cap. So I took off this little lock nut that's underneath this brass adjustment nut, and also the lock nut on here, because I was pretty close to running out of free length just by the way I did my cable. But you don't necessarily need to do what I'm doing as far as taking those nuts off, but I did just to get some more, to actually gain back some free length, to make sure that my slide is actually sat inside all the way down, which it is, and then I can make some fine-tune adjustments so that I take up the slack, and so when I pull the throttle back, as soon as I start to slightly twist it, it will start to lift. That's what I don't want any slack in that process. But anyway, so now that's seating just nicely, and we get a visual, and we're able to pull it all the way up and out of the way, so we got full throttle. So that's why I like to verify before I put these carbs on, or any carb on the stock bike or whatever, that I'm getting this slide to go up and down completely, and then I'll bolt it on. Some quick details on this VM20, the Mcuni carb. So we have two screws like you typically find on these style carbs. You have the center screw that's right in line with the slide itself. I'll show you what that actually is just doing is the hole goes through and the end of this pen will hit this cutout on the slide. So, you know, when you're making these adjustments, this is called the idle screw, idle RPM adjustment screw. So basically if I'm turning it clockwise and that pen starts to hit that ramp on the slide itself, it'll start lifting it up. And as it's lifting, you know, that's like cracking the throttle. It's lifting right now. As I'm screwing it in, it's starting to lift higher. That is making your idle move up, higher RPM. So that's basically all that's happening, if you guys didn't know, is you got this adjustment screw. So that's how you adjust your idle. And then this screw here is on the air filter side of this carb body. It's down here. So I'll call that an air adjustment screw. That's gonna meter how much air is coming into the circuit for idle tuning. It's not a fuel mixture screw, which would be on this side of the carb near the intake manifold. If you had a screw here, that would be a fuel screw to make some adjustments for idle. Since this is on this side on the air filter, we're letting in the air. All wrapped up here. I got everything on, air filters on, I ran my fuel line. So what we're going to do is do the priming of the oil system. This is a 14 millimeter nut on this Lifan engine. Use a non-impact powered, battery powered drill and turn it counterclockwise. We'll do it for like a minute, and that way we're priming, getting all the oil pushed up into the top end, and everything else coated with some fresh oil. And if you want it easier, you can pull the spark plug out so you don't have any compression, but I'll do it with the spark plug in regardless. Spark plug on this engine, I like to use the C7 HSA. That's part number 4629 by NGK. So I got the front sprocket that finally in the mail, and that's a 17 tooth that we went with for 420 chain. I put the cover on, but we are never experienced this, but you're getting some rubbing. Right here we can see on the casting right there is where the two chain links are rubbing in there. So I'm going to take a little grinder wheel and clearance that out a little bit and then put that back on. So just make sure you check yours. You'll hear it. This is just from me pushing it back and forth on the driveway. I didn't ride it. So just make sure that your covers are clearing the chain. So we get everything buttoned up, which is on this bike. The next step is obviously let's get it kicked over, let's get it running, idling, and then we're gonna do our test to make sure the charging system's working at the battery, and then also that we are getting appropriate voltages at the front headlight. Okay, so the way that this harness is designed to feed into the OEM harness is that you're going to get AC, 12 volts, AC. Final steps here, we got everything plugged in electrically, carbs on, ready to kick this over with some gas in the tank. So you're going to want to kick it over, let's get it firing over, idling, and then we'll do a quick test. I'll just tell you how to do it, I'm not going to show it on video, but you're going to do a quick test on the electrical. What we want to do is verify that we are getting appropriate DC voltage to the battery. So again, this is a 12 volt Lifan engine, 12 volt rectifier regulator. So we want to ensure that on your voltmeter you're set to DC, and then you probe the positive and negative terminals on that 12 volt battery that we have in there, and make sure that you're above 12 volts obviously running. And then when you rev it, you want to see it jump, feed up to about 13 to 14 volts. That means it's charging. So just verify that you got some charging going on to maintain that battery voltage above 12.5 volts. And then at the headlight, the way that the harness is designed, it's feeding alternating AC current to the headlight bulb. So you're going to switch your voltmeter to AC and measure for 12 volts at the headlight. Okay, and that has to it maintains the key switch setting. So on the second setting is when your headlight comes on the key switch. You have off, run, and then I call it the second setting while it's running, and that's the headlight. So that's going to turn on your headlight. So basically what you're going to do is you got your high and low switch, okay? It's not on and off, it's just a high and low. And the blue and white represent the high and low power feeds, and the green is ground. So take your voltmeter on AC, put the black lead up against your ground, and take a voltage reading at either the high or low, depending on what bulb you have on the filament. And you should be getting 12 volts at the front end, and the bulb is sufficiently bright. It's just going to be regulated, so it's not going to go much higher than around 12 volts, I'd say. So we're going to just do our kick over and take our bike for a test ride. But just real quick on the carb, this is a Mcuni VM20. That center, that big screw is your idle screw. Turn that out, close it off clockwise, and then back it about 1.5 turns. That should get you to a starting point for the idle. Probably be a little high at first, and then you just fine tune it. You too, buddy. And then this screw here, that little screw that I'm showing, is your air screw. So you want to turn that clockwise, gently close it off, and then back that one about 1.5 turns. All right. So once this bike gets kicked over, it's fired, you might need to adjust your idle down a little bit so it's not too high, but you're going to let this engine warm up for a few minutes. And then I would take this idle screw and slowly creep it counterclockwise a little bit. And then if the idle speed is raising, that's an indication that you can keep going a little bit until you find where it's at the max idle speed based on you turning that little air screw. All right, and once you get to that point where it's not raising anymore idle wise, stop turning. Maybe turn it back just a little bit, a hair back clockwise, and then make your final idle adjustment with the idle screw right there, and then you're good to go for idle air fuel mixture. All right, let's get this bike kicked over. Hey Harper, say happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Thank you. And there goes the new little pooch that ate my memory card. Kick starts, like these are higher compression engines, more so on the YX140, but or the bigger bores too, is you want to find on the kickstart, you're trying to bring this piston to top dead center before you give it a good kick. So just kind of rotate it till you feel that it's met that compression spot, and then give it the kick over or push down so you can start the engine. Otherwise it can combust and kick back at you if you don't have it set kind of where this is. Alright, so that little gentle kick is enough to get this engine running. So like I said, let the engine warm up, make your adjustments on your carb initially for the idle, and you know, then you can go for a test ride. It's a good time to check your electrics too if you want to go through the key switch, pull your brake levers, your foot brake lever, make sure all your lights are working. But let this thing warm up just a little bit, because that carb wants to get warmed up before you really crack on it. One other thing about the carb, so this pull out right here is an enrichener actually. It's not a choke, it's a fuel enrichener. I didn't even have it, when it's pushed in, it's not enrichening, it's just running as a rideable carb. If you pull it out, it's like a choke, enrichening the mixture. But the way this is set up, it doesn't need it. Just letting you know that's what that is there for. But I just keep it pushed in, and obviously the engine's fine to kick over on a cold start. It's warmed up good enough. I'm gonna take it for the ride. Alright, so that's going to be a wrap on this Lifan 12 volt swap. there's more to the electrical stuff, the stators. There's a lot more complicated topic issues and discussions on that stuff, but the way that I addressed it isn't really going into any details. It's just showing how to get something working and working acceptably. So I hope that kind of clarifies how you guys can make these swaps happen using the stock harness, using a sub harness, putting a 12 volt in it, and you know, using a Mcuni Carb instead of the crappy Chinese carbs or whatever that come with these bikes. I mean, don't even, in my opinion, mess with a VM20 Japanese carb, jets that you can buy off the shelf. Keep this carb running forever. What else? And you know, like the way that we did this build, this is an H model bike that we didn't rebuild the engine. It had a serious transmission issue, but we can always circle back and rebuild it and put it back in here, and you know, take out some of the sub harness and pop it back in and use the original parts and pieces that are up inside the frame as far as the harness goes. So we didn't alter anything really. So just a smart way to put a bike together and do it right. Okay. Well, guys, hope you guys appreciate the series. Don't really ever ask, but if you guys like this tip, I gave you a lot of information on how to do this stuff. I got a PayPal link, man. Throw me some money if you appreciate all this information I give to you guys, because it takes a lot of my time to stop and do videos instead of just pumping bikes out and this is a paying customer's bike, so I took a lot of time just to stop and make sure I'm filling you guys in how I'm doing it. But anyways, please subscribe. Appreciate it, guys.